The conversation ended. The room emptied. But one line stayed behind, replaying in the quiet long after the audience had gone home. A line came back. I was lying in bed. It was already past midnight. The day had ended. The lights were off. The room was quiet in the way rooms only get when nothing more is going to happen. And then a sentence from earlier in the day arrived. Not pushed in. Just, there. Suddenly present, like someone had switched on a small lamp in the corner of my mind. It was something I had said at lunch. The conversation itself had ended hours ago. The other person had laughed. They had moved on. We had talked about other things after it. They had walked back to their desk. The day had continued. But the line came back. And then the version where I said it differently came back. And then the version where I didn't say it at all. And then the look on their face that maybe wasn't the look I remembered. And then the silence before they laughed, which maybe was a beat longer than usual, or maybe wasn't. I checked the clock. 12:47, the conversation was 12 hours behind me. The other person was probably asleep. I was not asleep. I was still in the conversation. Why does the conversation keep coming back? I rolled onto my side. The line replayed. I rolled onto the other side. The line replayed. It wasn't even an important conversation. Nothing was at stake. No one was angry. There was no consequence pending. By every external measure, the conversation was over. But by every internal measure, the conversation was still happening. This wasn't the first time. There was the email I sent last Tuesday that I rewrote in my head for 3 days. There was the small thing I said at the dinner 2 weeks ago that I still occasionally re-edit. There was a phrase from a phone call in March, that I had quietly rehearsed at least 9 different ways since. Why? The other person is gone. The room has emptied. The moment has passed. And I am still here, alone, holding a script that nobody is reading anymore. Why do I keep replaying conversations that already ended? A quiet answer came. I once heard about a small theater in a town I'd never visited. The play had ended. The audience had gone home. The lights in the seats had dimmed. The doors had closed. The cleaners had not yet arrived. And on the empty stage, in the half-light, the lead actor was still there. He was not bowing. The bows had finished. He was not greeting anyone. The greetings were done. He was running through his lines. Not from the start. From a particular scene. The one in the middle where he had stumbled slightly on a word. Where he had paused a half-beat too long. Where, he was sure, the audience had noticed. He said the line again. Cleanly this time. Then again, with a small adjustment. Then a third time, with the breath in a different place. The audience was not there. They had not been there for almost an hour. They had gone to dinner, to bed, to the rest of their lives. They were not thinking about his pause. But he was still on the stage. Refining the line. Trying to fix the moment they were no longer watching. He was not performing for them. He was performing for the part of himself that was still standing in that scene, waiting for it to come out right. Some nights, I know that actor. The audience left. The script stayed. It took me a while to notice what was actually happening. I had been telling myself the replays were about the other person. What did they think? Did I sound stupid? Did I offend them? Did they go home and notice the awkward thing I said? And those questions felt urgent. So I had been treating them like a problem to solve. If I could just rehearse the line correctly, in my head, the awkwardness would dissolve. The other person would somehow telepathically receive the better version. The moment would be repaired. But the moment never repaired. Because the moment was not the problem. I was lying in bed, re-saying a sentence to someone who had already left the day. And I started to wonder, late, who I was actually speaking to. It was not the friend. It was not the coworker. It was not the person on the other end of the conversation. It was a quieter someone. Someone closer in. Someone who had been there when the conversation ended and the door had closed and I had walked away alone, and who, even after I left the room, was still sitting in the chair. I was not trying to fix the conversation. I was trying to comfort whoever had been left behind by it. And that person, I was starting to realize, was me. So I asked, more carefully this time. If the other person is gone, and the line is gone, and the moment is gone, what is the replay actually for? Another quiet answer came. Maybe you are not trying to change the conversation. Maybe you are trying to change how alone you felt after it. That landed somewhere deeper than I had expected. Because it was true. The conversation itself had been fine. Nothing terrible had happened in it. The thing I kept replaying was not the conversation. It was the moment after. The moment after the door closes. The moment after the laugh fades. The moment when the room I was just in becomes a room I am no longer in. That moment, every time, leaves me a little smaller than I was before. And the replay is the body's small, private attempt to undo that, to walk back into the warm room, to say the line a different way, to receive a different look, to leave with a different feeling. Not a different conversation. A different aftermath. I am not rehearsing for an audience that left. I am rehearsing for a version of myself who did not have to leave alone. After a while, a quiet answer came. I once heard about a postman in a small village. Every morning, he delivered letters along the same route. He knew every house by its gate, every road by the sound it made under his shoes. He worked carefully, and by late morning his bag was empty. And every evening, after the village had gone quiet, he sat at his small kitchen table with a single dim lamp on. He would take out a notebook. In the notebook, he kept copies of some of the letters he had delivered that morning. Not all of them. Just the ones that had felt strange in his hands when he carried them. Letters that had been heavy. Letters that he had paused at a gate to look at. Letters that he was not sure he had delivered correctly. He would reread them in the lamplight. Sometimes for hours. The letters were not his. The letters had already arrived. The recipients had already read them, or not read them, or thrown them away, or filed them somewhere. The day was over. The mail had been delivered. But the postman was still holding the letters in his mind. Turning them. Rechecking them. As if, by rereading them in the lamplight, he could change what they had said. He could not. He knew he could not. He read them anyway. Some nights, I am not sure whether I am the postman or the lamp. Maybe I am just the kitchen, still lit after the village sleeps, and then something turned. I had been assuming, for years, that the replays were a problem with my memory. That I remembered too much. That my mind kept too many receipts of small social moments. That if I could just remember less, I would be free. But that was not what was happening. My memory was fine. The conversation had ended hours ago, and I remembered it clearly. Memory was not the difficulty. The difficulty was that some part of me had not yet left the room where the conversation took place. The conversation had ended. The other person had stood up and walked away. The day had moved on around me. The hours had passed. By every reasonable measure, the room had emptied. But internally, I had not emptied with it. I was still standing where the conversation had been. Replaying it. Retasting it. Repositioning my body inside it. As if the conversation were a small house I had been living in, and the front door had been left open behind me, and I kept walking back in to check that I had left it correctly. This is the part one had been getting wrong. The replay was not me thinking about the conversation. The replay was me, still in the room, trying to find the moment when I would have been allowed to leave. So what now? Then one last quiet answer came. Maybe the body is not asking for the perfect version of the line. Maybe it is asking for permission to leave the room. I sat with that for a while. Because it explained everything. Why the rehearsals didn't help. Why finding the better phrasing didn't quiet the loop. Why even apologizing the next day, sometimes, didn't end it, because the apology was still happening inside the same room I was trying to exit. The conversation is not the room. The room is the part of you that kept standing there after the words ended. I once heard someone, in a much older language, say something simpler about leaving a place. You do not have to fix the floor on your way out. The floor was someone else's. You stood on it briefly. You spoke. You listened. You left. The conversation has already done its work, for them, and for you. Maybe the next kindness is not another edit. Maybe it is absence. I notice now, sometimes, when a line returns. It still comes back. The actor still walks back on stage. The postman still opens the notebook. But occasionally, very softly, something inside me also says. The audience left. The script stayed. But not every line needs to be performed again. And then, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the room finally empties. And I get to go with it. Cross-reference. A Quiet Answer Episode 07. The narrator asks an ordinary question, why do I keep replaying conversations that already ended? And follows it across the night line, the rolling bed, the empty theater fable, the voice behind the replay, the core answer, not a different conversation, a different aftermath, the postman fable, the reversal, I had not yet left the room, and a final quiet permission to leave. The two fables anchor the episode in a low adult fairy tale tone, while the answering voice never instructs and only reflects. End of file.